It came from 12 o'clock high, a blur of black and yellow. The Focke-Wulf 190. For B-17 crews in 1943, this was the nightmare. An angle their nose guns couldn't cover. A killing ground. The 8th Air Force was bleeding out over Europe, losing 173 bombers in just 3 months. Without fighter escorts that could fly deep into Germany, the bomber formations were being massacred on the long, lonely flight home. Half of all crews wouldn't survive 25 missions. They called it the Gauntlet. But what if a bomber didn't need an escort? What if the bomber became the escort? Army Air Force engineers were asked to build a monster, a flying destroyer. They took a B-17 and ripped its soul out. No bombs, just guns. 16 of them, a new chin turret to kill the 12 o'clock nightmare. They welded on armor. They tripled the ammunition. They created the YB-40, and on May 29, 1943, they gave it to Captain James Hartwell and told him to fly it into hell. He was about to fly a weapon that promised to save thousands, but it was hiding a fatal secret, a flaw so simple and so deadly it would turn the protector into the prey. In the cold spring of 1943, the skies over the Third Reich were a graveyard. The American strategic bombing campaign, the great hope for cracking Fortress Europe, was on the verge of collapse. The theory had been simple. B-17 flying fortresses, packed in tight combat boxes, would defend each other with a bristling hedgehog of 50 caliber machine guns. They would be unstoppable. The theory was wrong. German fighter pilots, flying the lethal Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109, had learned the bomber's weaknesses. They identified the blind spots. The deadliest was from 12 o'clock high. Diving at speeds the B-17's nose guns couldn't track. They would rip through the cockpit and engines with 20mm cannon fire. For the bomber crews, the most terrifying part of the mission wasn't the target. It was the return leg. Their short-range fighter escorts, Spitfires and P-47s, would reach the limit of their fuel and peel away, leaving the bombers alone. It was then the Luftwaffe would rise. Crews called it the Gauntlet. 173 B-17s, and their crews were lost in the 3 months leading up to May. The math was brutal. The breaking point was near. If the fighters couldn't go all the way to Germany and back, the Army Air Force decided on a radical, desperate solution. Turn a bomber into a fighter. The project was codenamed the YB-40. The Y for experimental, the B for bomber, and the 40 to designate a new, terrifying breed. Engineers at Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa took a standard B-17F and performed battlefield surgery. Everything that didn't shoot was torn out. The bomb bay? Gone. The bombardier's station was gutted and replaced with a revolutionary new weapon. A remote-controlled Bendix chin turret, armed with twin 50 caliber machine guns, specifically to kill the 12 o'clock high attack. But they didn't stop there. They installed a second dorsal turret, just behind the radio room, creating a devastating field of fire above the aircraft. In the waist, the single guns were replaced with twin mounts. In the nose, new cheek guns were added. The ammunition capacity was tripled, from around 4,000 rounds to a staggering 11,275. Finally, they welded additional armor plating around every crew position. When they were finished, the YB-40 bristled with 16 50 caliber machine guns. It was a flying battleship, a destroyer. Its mission, to fly within the bomber stream, lure in the German fighters, and obliterate them with a wall of lead. By March 1943, 12 of these monsters were complete. In early May, they were delivered to the 92nd Bombardment Group at RAF Allenbury. The base commander, Colonel William Reed, hand-picked 7 crews to fly the first combat test. One of those men was Captain James Hartwell. Hartwell was 26 years old, a veteran. He had 42 combat missions under his belt, a lifetime in the Gauntlet, but he had zero experience in what he was about to fly. On the morning of May 29, 1943, he climbed into the cockpit of aircraft number 425738. His crew had already named it Hedgehog. At 11:47 a.m., he watched the ground crew load the last belt of ammunition. The plane felt wrong. It weighed 4,000 pounds more than any B-17 he had ever touched. The test pilots back at Wright Field had warned him. The center of gravity was off, sitting too far back with all that ammunition stored behind the empty bomb bay. The weight made everything sluggish. A standard B-17F could climb to its 20,000-foot cruising altitude in about 25 minutes. The YB-40, Hartwell learned, needed 48 minutes. The control yoke felt heavy, like fighting a freight train. But the guns! Hartwell had never seen firepower like this. The chin turret alone could shred a Focke-Wulf before it ever got in range. Every angle, every vector of attack was met with overlapping fields of fire. The mission brief was simple. The target: the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France. The 7 YB-40s would be seeded throughout the formation, placed in the most vulnerable spots. Low squadron, trail element. Anywhere the German fighters loved to hunt. At 1:25 p.m., Hartwell started the 4 Wright Cyclone engines. They ran smooth. At 1:50, the tower cleared them for takeoff. Hedgehog lumbered down the runway, followed by 168 other B-17s. The target time was 4:00 p.m. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30. The sky, clear moments before, was now dotted with ugly black puffs of flak over Guernsey. The radio chatter confirmed their fears. German fighters were scrambling from airfields near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, reported the first sign of trouble. Fuel consumption was tracking higher than briefed. The YB-40 wasn't just heavy. It was thirsty. It burned far more gas just to haul its own weight and drag to altitude. At 4:02 p.m., Saint-Nazaire appeared through broken clouds. The main formation's bomb bay doors opened. Bombs fell. And then they turned for home. This was the critical moment. The standard B-17s, now thousands of pounds lighter, climbed faster. They accelerated. Hartwell pushed his throttles forward to keep up. Hedgehog started falling behind. The standard B-17s pulled away at 160 miles per hour. Hartwell had the throttles at maximum continuous power. Hedgehog could only manage 148. Sergeant Morrison climbed down from the top turret. He was 31, a maintenance veteran with 200 hours on B-17s before this conversion. He scanned the engine instruments and shook his head. Number 3, cylinder head temperature. It was climbing into the red. The extra weight, the extra drag from the new turrets, was making the Cyclones work harder than they were ever designed for. Morrison had no choice. He throttled back the number 3 engine before it overheated and seized. Hedgehog slowed to 142 miles per hour. The main formation was now 3 miles ahead. Then 4. Hartwell looked out his window. He could see the other 6 YB-40s, all in their assigned groups. And every single one of them was struggling. Every one of them was falling behind. The radio operator called from the waist. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney. He'd spotted them. Contrails at 4 o'clock high. German fighters. Climbing to intercept. They were Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 2, based at Vannes. 6, maybe 8 aircraft. They weren't attacking the main formation. They were hunting stragglers. They were hunting him. Hartwell keyed the intercom. All gunners, track targets. The chin turret gunner reported good visibility. The ball turret rotated smoothly. Both waist gunners confirmed their twin mounts were loaded and tracking. The first Focke-Wulf dove, coming in at 5 o'clock. Range, 200 yards. The tail gunner opened fire at 800. Tracers walked toward the diving fighter. The German pilot saw the wall of lead, broke left, and climbed away without firing a single shot. The second attack came from 11 o'clock high. 2 Focke-Wulfs in trail. The classic, deadly frontal pass. The chin turret gunner tracked the lead aircraft and squeezed the trigger. A 4-second burst. The 50 caliber rounds stitched across the FW-190's engine cowling. Black smoke poured from the fighter. It rolled inverted and dove straight toward the channel. From the waist, Delaney confirmed the kill. The second Focke-Wulf broke off its attack, seeing its leader vaporized. For 6 minutes, the YB-40 was everything it was promised to be. It was a fortress. 3 more German fighters approached. 3 more attacks were broken off early. The overlapping fields of fire from 16 guns created a curtain of steel no pilot wanted to penetrate. But Hedgehog was still slowing down. The main formation was 6 miles ahead now, then 7. Hartwell could barely see the bomber stream, a faint smudge against the afternoon sky. Morrison reported the fuel state. They had burned 800 gallons more than briefed during the climb and combat. At this power setting, they had 90 minutes of fuel left to reach Allenbury. The main formation would be on the ground in 70. Another pair of Focke-Wulfs appeared at 2 o'clock. These pilots didn't break off. They circled, just out of range. They had figured it out. They had seen the YB-40 couldn't keep up. It couldn't run. The German fighters circled at a distance, waiting for the bomber to fall even farther behind. Waiting for the right moment to attack from multiple vectors, all at once. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward again, desperate for speed. The number 3 engine temperature gauge climbed back into the red. Morrison watched it, his hand on the throttle, but said nothing. The escort bomber with 16 guns had become the target it was supposed to protect. The attack came at 4:43 p.m. 3 Focke-Wulfs, not one at a time. All at once, high right, low left, and dead ahead at 12 o'clock, level. Hartwell couldn't evade. With all that weight, the YB-40 turned like a freight train. He held his course and altitude. His gunners opened fire simultaneously. The chin turret tracked the frontal attack. The top turret swung right. The ball turret rotated left. Both waist gunners fired through their opposite windows. Spent brass cascaded into the fuselage. The entire aircraft shook from the combined recoil of 8 guns firing at once. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy shattered. The fighter rolled right and fell away, trailing smoke. The high attacker, seeing the fate of his leader, broke off early. But the low attacker pressed his run. He fired a 2-second burst. 2mm cannon rounds punched through Hedgehog's right wing. One hydraulic line was severed. The waist gunner reported fluid spraying across the window. Delaney called out the damage. The right landing gear hydraulic system had failed. They would have to manually crank the gear down for landing, if they made it back. Morrison checked the fuel again. 72 minutes to Allenbury. The formation was 8 miles ahead and pulling away. They were alone, damaged and bleeding over occupied France, with German fighters circling for the kill. The radio crackled. It was another YB-40, Captain Richard Hayes, flying aircraft 425741 with the 305th Bomb Group. His gunship had also fallen behind. He was in the same desperate situation. 2 YB-40s, now separated from the main formation, both struggling to maintain airspeed, both burning fuel at an alarming rate. Hayes made a suggestion. Form up together. Combined defensive fire from 32. Guns might be enough to keep the Germans at bay. Hartwell agreed. Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match. Hedgehog's altitude at 19,500. The Focke-Wulfs circled wider now. 4 were visible, maybe 6. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They wouldn't charge into a combined field of fire from 32 machine guns. But they weren't leaving either. They were shadowing them, waiting. At 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coast, outbound. The English Channel stretched gray and empty below. 53 miles to the English coast. 41 minutes of flying time at their current, agonizingly slow ground speed. Number 3 engine was still running hot. Morrison had pulled the power back twice already to save it. They couldn't maintain altitude much longer. Hedgehog descended through 19,000 feet. 18,800, 18,600, then Hayes radioed again. His number 2 engine oil pressure was dropping. He had to throttle it back to prevent a seizure. His YB-40 slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both aircraft were struggling. Both crews were watching their fuel gauges tick steadily toward empty. Both were hoping the German fighters wouldn't follow them out over the water. At 5:22 p.m., the hope vanished. 2 Messerschmitt 109s appeared at 6 o'clock high. They had followed the stragglers all the way to the channel. The tail gunners called out the intercept. Range, 1,400 yards and closing. The fighters dove through 18,000 feet. Their cannons opened fire at 800 yards. Hartwell couldn't climb. He couldn't accelerate. He couldn't turn hard enough to throw off their aim. The YB-40 had become a flying target with empty sky all around. The tail gunner fired first. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cack, 24 years old, a former ski shooting champion from Cleveland. He had never tracked targets moving this fast. The lead Messerschmitt 109 closed to 600 yards. Cack walked his tracers across empty sky. The German pilot jinked left, then right, then dove 20 degrees. His wingman followed. Both fighters opened fire at 400 yards. Cannon shells tore through Hedgehog's tail section. One round exploded in the horizontal stabilizer. Another punched through the fuselage, just 2 feet behind Cack's position. The aircraft shuddered. Hartwell felt the controls go mushy. Morrison climbed back to check the damage. The elevator cables were intact, but the trim tab mechanism was jammed. Hartwell would have to fight the control yoke, physically manhandling the aircraft, all the way back to England. The Messerschmitts pulled up for another pass. This time, Hayes's YB-40 opened fire with all its dorsal guns. The combined firepower from both gunships filled the sky with tracers. The German fighters broke left and circled back to altitude, surprised by the volume of fire. At 5:31 p.m., 4 new aircraft appeared from the northeast. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, long-range escort fighters returning from a sweep over Belgium. They had heard the desperate radio calls about stragglers under attack. The Thunderbolts dove at the Messerschmitts. The German pilots saw them coming, broke off the engagement, and turned east, fleeing back toward France. The P-47s didn't pursue. They formed up on the 2 crippled YB-40s and waggled their wings. An escort to the English coast. Hartwell checked his fuel. 37 minutes remaining at his current power setting. 29 miles to landfall. They would make it, barely, but the concept was broken. He could see it now with devastating clarity. The YB-40 worked perfectly as a gun platform. 1650 caliber guns could shred any fighter that got close. The chin turret had changed the equation for frontal attacks. But the weight made it useless. After the standard B-17s dropped their bombs, they became light, fast, and agile. They climbed away from the flak, accelerating toward home. The YB-40, however, was still carrying 11,000 rounds of ammunition, 4,000 extra pounds of guns and armor that couldn't be dropped. That extra weight was dragging them down, making them slower, making them burn more fuel, making them targets. The aircraft designed to protect the bombers needed protection itself. Hayes radioed at 5:47. His number 2 engine had seized completely. Oil pressure was at 0. He'd feathered the propeller. His YB-40 was descending through 15,000 feet on just 3 engines. Morrison calculated the numbers. Hayes wouldn't make Alconbury. He might not even make England. His fuel consumption on 3 engines, fighting that much drag, was too high. The English coast appeared at 5:53 p.m. Hayes aimed for the first airfield he could find, RAF Manston, on the Kent Peninsula. He called the tower and declared an emergency. They cleared him for an immediate landing. Hartwell watched Hayes's YB-40 drop away toward the emergency field. one gunship limping home on 3 engines, another damaged and barely controllable. Both aircraft would require major repairs before they could fly again. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog touched down at Allenbury. Hartwell, fighting the controls to the last second, had cranked the landing gear down manually. The right main gear locked with only 15 seconds to spare before touchdown. The ground crews swarmed the aircraft. They counted 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 1 severed hydraulic line, 1 jammed trim tab, 1 damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel Reed was waiting at the hard stand. He wanted Hartwell's assessment. Immediately. The first combat test of the YB-40 concept, the flying destroyer that was supposed to protect bomber formations all the way to Germany and back. Hartwell shut down the engines and climbed out. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His hands still shook from fighting the controls for 90 minutes. He looked at Colonel Reed and said 3 words that would end the program. It can't keep up. But Reed wouldn't accept it. Not yet. He ordered 7 more missions. Maybe the first test was an anomaly. Maybe different tactics would work. Maybe positioning the YB-40s differently in the formation would solve the speed problem. The second mission launched on June 15th against Le Mans. 4 YB-40s flew. All 4 fell behind after the bomb drop. The third mission, on June 22nd, targeted the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Hulls. 11 YB-40s were dispatched. 1 aircraft was lost to flak and fighters. The remaining 10 struggled home, landing hours after the main formation. Engineers at the Abbott's Ripton Depot tried modifications. They adjusted the waste gun feeds. They changed ammunition loading procedures. They moved weight forward to try and fix the center of gravity. Nothing worked. The fundamental problem remained. A B-17F carrying bombs weighed 65,000 pounds at takeoff. After dropping its bombs, it weighed $48,000. The YB-40 weighed 68,000 pounds at takeoff. After hours of combat, it still weighed 64,000 pounds. It was carrying 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that couldn't be dropped. On June 28th, 6 YB-40s attacked Saint-Nazaire again. They claimed 1 German fighter destroyed. All 6 fell behind the formation on the return leg. 1 crew reported they had been alone over France for 43 minutes. Alone meant vulnerable. The 8th Air Force compiled the statistics after 9 combat missions. 48 sorties flown. 5 confirmed German fighter kills. 2 probables. 1 YB-40 lost. And every single aircraft had fallen behind its formation after the bomb drop. The average separation distance was 7 miles. The average time spent alone over enemy territory was 38 minutes. The intelligence reports reached the Luftwaffe. Fighter Chief Adolf Galland reviewed them. His pilots had figured out the YB-40s quickly. They looked different. The extra turret was visible from any angle. They had no bomb bay doors, and they always flew in the most vulnerable positions. After the formation dropped its bombs, the YB-40s became stragglers, and German fighters were trained to hunt stragglers. Galland's assessment was brutal. The YB-40 kills were insignificant. His pilots, he reported, would rather attack the flying destroyers than avoid them. They were easy targets. They couldn't run. On July 29th, the last 2 YB-40s flew their final combat mission. The target, U-boat yards at Kiel. Both aircraft fell behind. Both required fighter escort to reach England. Both landed at emergency fields, short of their home base. In August, General Karl Spaatz canceled the program. The 12 surviving YB-40s were returned to the United States in November. Most became gunnery trainers. 4 were stripped and converted back to standard bombers. Tutu concept had died after just 3 months of combat. Testing. The Army Air Forces had spent $469,000 per aircraft on the conversions, $5.6 million, for a weapon system that made bombers more vulnerable, not safer. The flying destroyer was a complete, total, and spectacular failure. But one piece of the YB-40 survived. One innovation that worked perfectly. The modification that was about to save thousands of bomber crews and change the course of the air war. Engineers at Wright Field studied the combat reports. They read Hartwell's debrief. They looked at the statistics. The YB-40 program was a failure. But the data was priceless, and they noticed something critical. Every YB-40 that engaged German fighters from the front stopped the attack. The Focke-Wulfs that had preyed on B-17s for months, diving from 12 o'clock high with impunity, were now being shredded. The innovation that worked perfectly, the one piece that Hartwell's crew had used to score their first kill, was the Bendix chin turret. Two 50-caliber guns firing forward with a clear field of fire. No blind spots, no convergence problems. It was the answer. That design was sent to Boeing immediately. The Bendix chin turret, born from the failed YB-40 program, entered mass production in September 1943. Boeing designated it the Bendix Model A, two 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, remotely controlled by the bombardier from his station. 300 rounds per gun, electrically powered traverse and elevation. Douglas Aircraft installed the new turret on the last 86 B-17F aircraft coming off their production line. These bombers deployed to England in October. The crews called it the answer to the 12 o'clock high. Before the chin turret, German fighters attacked B-17 formations from dead ahead. The bombardier's position only had two flexible cheek guns mounted on the sides of the nose. They had limited traverse, a limited field of fire. German pilots would fly straight at the bombers, firing their cannons right through the gap in the defensive coverage. It was the single deadliest tactic used against the flying fortress. The chin turret eliminated that gap. It gave the B-17 a forward-facing sting it had desperately needed. The bombardier now tracked attacking fighters through a simple gun sight, pressed the firing button, and unleashed two 50-caliber guns that converged at 400 yards. German pilots, who had grown comfortable with these head-on passes, suddenly faced a wall of concentrated fire they couldn't avoid. The combat reports from November 1943 showed the change. The 91st Bomb Group flew the new turret-equipped B-17s on a mission to Gelsenkirchen. They reported 12 frontal attacks. 10 broke off early, before they were in range. The other two pressed through and took heavy hits. One Focke-Wulf was confirmed destroyed. The number of bombers lost to frontal attacks on that mission? 0. Boeing incorporated the chin turret into its new production model, the B-17G. The first G model rolled off the line in December 1943. This would become the definitive flying fortress. The factories in Seattle, Wichita, Long Beach, and Burbank all began building B-17Gs with the standardized chin turret. Production ramped up fast. 50 aircraft per month in January 1944. 120 per month by March, 230 per month by June. Before the war ended, 8,680 B-17Gs would be delivered. Every single one of them carried the chin turret that had started life on the failed YB-40. The impact was staggering. The 303rd Bomb Group transitioned to B-17Gs in February 1944. Their loss rate from frontal attacks dropped from 12% to 3%. The 379th Bomb Group reported similar numbers, 11% down to 4%. The 384th Bomb Group tracked their data meticulously. In the 6 months before chin turrets, they lost 43 bombers to frontal attacks. In the 12 months after getting the B-17G, they lost only 14 to 8th Air Force statisticians calculated the overall impact. The chin turret, across all groups, all missions, all theaters, reduced bomber losses to frontal attacks by 71%. By VE Day, the B-17G equipped 32 heavy bombardment groups. The YB-40 program lasted 3 months, flew 48 combat sorties, and cost $5.6 million. It was a failure. But the chin turret from those 12 failed gunships flew on 8,680 flying fortresses. It protected crews on more than 290,000 combat sorties. It saved an estimated 2,300 bombers that would have been shot down. That is 23,000 crew members who came home. And the chin turret wasn't the only YB-40 innovation that survived. Engineers, studying the combat reports, noticed 2 other modifications that solved real problems. On a standard B-17F, both waist gunners stood directly across from each other in the fuselage. During attacks from the beam, they fought for space. They bumped into each other. They physically blocked each other's field of fire. The YB-40, to make room for its twin mounts, had moved the right waist gun position forward by 30 inches, a staggered configuration. The reports noted that gunners on the YB-40 never interfered with each other. Each gunner had room to move, room to swing their gun through its full traverse. Boeing incorporated staggered waist positions into the B-17G. Waist gunners reported a 40% better field of fire, fewer jams from rushed reloading, better coordination during simultaneous attacks from both sides. The third improvement came from analyzing Sergeant Kak's debrief from Hedgehog's tail. He had reported limited visibility from the standard tail position. The windows were small, restricting his view, making it difficult to track fighters approaching from 6 o'clock low. The Army Air Force contracted with the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to redesign the tail position. They installed larger, wraparound windows, better visibility above and below, an improved gun mount, and enhanced armor protection. They called it the Cheyenne tail. It became standard on all late-production B-17Gs. 3 innovations, all born from a failed program. The chin turret, the staggered waist guns, the Cheyenne tail. All 3 were incorporated into the B-17G. All 3 saved lives on every single mission for the rest of the war. Captain James Hartwell flew 16 more missions in standard B-17s. He completed his 25-mission tour in October 1943. He survived. He went home to Pennsylvania. He never flew a YB-40 again after that first disastrous mission to Saint-Nazaire. But in December, he returned to Allenbury as a training officer. The first of the new B-17Gs were arriving. He watched the new green crews walking around the bombers. They pointed at the new chin turret, gleaming under the nose. They asked how it worked. They asked where it came from. Hartwell told them about the YB-40. He told them about the flying destroyer that couldn't keep up, the gunship that became the target. The 3-month program that failed so badly, it was canceled before the summer ended. Then he showed them the turret. He explained how the bombardier operated it. He demonstrated the field of fire. He walked them through the ammunition loading procedure. The crews listened carefully. They understood. The weapon that would protect them, the weapon that would give them a fighting chance against the 12 o'clock high, came from an aircraft that had failed. An expensive $5.6 million mistake. One pilot asked Hartwell if the YB-40 was worth it. Worth the money, worth the effort, worth the risk to the crews who flew those 12 aircraft into combat, knowing they would fall behind. Hartwell looked at the new B-17G on the hard stand, the chin turret gleaming in the weak English sunlight. He thought about frontal attacks. He thought about Focke-Wulfs diving through formations. He thought about bombardiers who, for the first time, had a real weapon to stop them. He thought about the 8,680 bombers that would carry that turret before the war ended. Worth it, he said. Every mission, every dollar, every bullet hole in Hedgehog's fuselage. The YB-40 taught the Army Air Force how to fail forward. The last YB-40 mission flew on July 29, 1943. By November, all surviving aircraft were back in the United States. Most became trainers. A few were scrapped. One even ended up in a scrapyard scene in the 1946 film The Best Years of Our Lives. No YB-40s survived the war intact. No museums preserved them. No restoration projects brought them back. The flying destroyer disappeared from history. But its innovation lived. It was everywhere. In every B-17G that flew over Europe. In every bomber crew that survived a frontal attack. In every pilot who made it to 25 missions because a Focke-Wulf broke off early when Chin turret tracers found their target. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, displays a B-17G, tail number 4483514. Shoo, 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 baby! The Chin turret gleams under the museum lights. A plaque mentions it was standard equipment on all G models. The plaque doesn't mention the YB-40. It doesn't explain where the turret came from. It doesn't tell the story of 12 aircraft that failed so completely. Their program lasted only 3 months. History remembers successes. The B-17G that helped win the war. The flying fortress that became an icon. The bomber that could take tremendous damage and bring its crews home. History forgets failures. The YB-40 that couldn't keep up. The $5.6 million mistake. The flying destroyer that needed protection instead of providing it. But failures teach lessons that successes never can. The YB-40 proved that good ideas, even when executed poorly, still contain good ideas. That expensive mistakes can generate priceless innovations. Boeing engineers didn't see the YB-40 as a failure. They saw it as research. They took what worked, and they fixed what didn't. The Chin turret worked. The extra weight didn't, so they kept the turret. And they dropped the weight. Simple, effective, and life-saving. The YB-40 crews, men like James Hartwell, didn't disappear into silence. They failed. They failed spectacularly. But their failure saved thousands.